The first thing you need to understand about being in a coma is that the movies get it all wrong. There's no peaceful floating in darkness, no gentle drift between consciousness and dreams. Instead, you're trapped in your own body like a prisoner in solitary confinement, aware of everything but powerless to respond. Every sound, every touch, every whispered conversation penetrates the fog with crystal clarity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I learned this on a Tuesday morning in October when a drunk driver ran a red light and sent my Honda Civic spinning into oncoming traffic. The last thing I remembered before the darkness was David's voice on my Bluetooth, arguing about dinner plans. Just pick something, Rachel. I don't care what we eat. How prophetic those words would become. When consciousness returned, it came not with light, but with sound. The steady beep of monitors, the whisper of ventilators, and voices discussing my fate as if I were already gone. My husband's voice was the first I recognized, though the man speaking bore little resemblance to the David I'd married 5 years ago. "How long are we talking here?" he asked someone, presumably a doctor. "Brain injuries are unpredictable, Mr. Hartwell. Some patients wake up in days, others take months. A few never regain consciousness at all." I tried to scream, to move, to signal somehow that I was listening to every word. Nothing. My body remained a prison, my voice silenced by tubes and trauma. "And if she doesn't wake up?" David's voice carried no grief, only clinical curiosity. "We'd need to discuss long-term care options. Feeding tubes, respiratory support, round-the-clock nursing. It's expensive. The word hung in the antiseptic air like a death sentence. How expensive? David pressed. Dr. Martinez, I would later learn his name, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Considering her age and the extent of her injuries, we're looking at potentially hundreds of thousands per year. Insurance covers some, but not everything. David's tone was already calculating, already planning. I wanted to weep, to rage, to somehow communicate that I was here, that I was fighting. Instead, I lay motionless while my husband discussed my life like a business transaction. Over the following days, I began to understand the true scope of my situation. The accident had left me with what the doctors called diffuse axonal injury, damage to the brain's white matter that could take months or years to heal, if it healed at all. My body had become a battleground between hope and economics, and I was losing the war without even being allowed to fight. David visited daily, always accompanied by different people. His sister Emma, who wept genuine tears and begged me to wake up. His mother, who spoke in hushed tones about God's plan and letting go gracefully. His business partner Kevin, who seemed more interested in discussing their architectural firm than my condition. But it was during the evening visits that I learned who my husband truly was. The insurance adjuster called. David told someone I couldn't tell who without opening my eyes. They're pushing for a settlement on the accident. 300,000. That's good, right? A woman's voice, unfamiliar and younger than mine. It's a start, but Rachel's medical bills are already approaching 50 grand. And that's just the first month. My heart monitor betrayed nothing of the fury building inside me. David was discussing insurance money while I fought for my life, and he wasn't alone. "When will you tell her family?" the woman asked. "Tell them what?" "Rachel's parents live in Florida. They can't afford to fly up here every week. As far as they know, I'm doing everything possible." But he wasn't doing everything possible. He was calculating the cost-benefit analysis of my survival. I began to pay closer attention to the conversations around me, storing every word in my trapped mind. David had been busy during my unconsciousness, busier than any grieving husband should be. He'd consulted with estate lawyers, reviewed our life insurance policies, and apparently started a relationship with someone named Melissa. Melissa was a physical therapist at the hospital, 28 years old with a voice like honey and the moral compass of a shark. She would arrive after visiting hours, when the ICU was quiet and the staff was minimal. Their conversations painted a picture that made my blood boil, if blood could boil in a motionless body. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The lawyers say the process could take weeks, David whispered one night, his hand not on mine but presumably on hers. Brain death has to be declared by 2 independent physicians. And then? Melissa's voice was breathy, excited. Then we can discuss options. The insurance money, the house, everything becomes much simpler. They were planning my funeral while I lay 3 feet away, planning their future with my death as the foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had always been obsessed with control, with planning, with ensuring every detail of our life was optimized for his benefit. Our marriage had been a series of calculated decisions designed to advance his career and social standing. I'd been too blinded by what I thought was love to see it. Now, listening to him plan my demise with his mistress, I finally understood the man I'd married. Dr. Martinez became an unwitting ally in my growing awareness of the conspiracy. During his rounds, he would speak to me directly, explaining procedures and treatments as if I could hear him. Which, of course, I could. "Your vitals are stable, Rachel," he would say, checking my charts. "Brain activity is still present. These things take time." But David was growing impatient with time. "Doctor, I need to ask about quality of life," David said one afternoon. "If Rachel does wake up, what are we looking at? Will she be herself?" "It's impossible to predict," Dr. Martinez replied honestly. "Some patients make full recoveries. Others may have cognitive or physical limitations. The brain is remarkably adaptable. But the costs of rehabilitation, of ongoing care— Mr. Hartwell, are you asking about withdrawing life support?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. "I'm asking about all our options," David said finally. "Rachel wouldn't want to live as a vegetable. She was always so independent, so vibrant. If there's no hope of recovery—" "There's always hope," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "I've seen patients with similar injuries make remarkable recoveries. It takes time and patience. Time and patience. 2 things David had never possessed in abundance." That night, after the staff had dimmed the lights and the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm, David returned with Kevin. Their conversation would change everything. "The firm can't carry this debt much longer," Kevin said, his voice low but not low enough. "The insurance premiums alone are killing us." "I know," David replied. "But if I push too hard for the plug, it looks suspicious. Especially with the life insurance." Life insurance. My life insurance policy that David had convinced me to increase just 6 months ago. "For security," he'd said. In case something happens. Something had happened, all right. And David was ready to collect. "What about Melissa?" Kevin asked. "She's taking a risk being here." "Melissa understands the situation. She knows this isn't permanent. They were talking about me like I was already dead, like my body was just an inconvenient obstacle to their plans." "The accident investigation is closed," Kevin continued. "Clean case, drunk driver, no fault on your end. The settlement should be finalized within the month." "Good. Between the settlement and the life insurance, we're looking at close to $1 million. Enough to expand the firm and start fresh." Start fresh. With my death as their capital investment, I tried to move, to scream, to somehow alert someone to what I was hearing. Nothing. My body remained a traitor, keeping their secrets while they planned my execution. But something was changing. Whether it was anger, determination, or simple cellular repair, I could feel tiny sparks of sensation returning to my extremities. A tingle in my left hand, a slight pressure where the feeding tube entered my abdomen. Small signs that my body was fighting back, even if my mind remained imprisoned. Dr. Martinez noticed it first during his morning rounds. "Interesting," he murmured, examining my latest brain scans. "There's increased activity in the motor cortex." "That's encouraging." David was less encouraged. "What does that mean?" "It could mean her brain is healing, forming new neural pathways. It's too early to tell, but any increase in activity is positive." That afternoon, David made a decision that would seal his fate. "Doctor, I need to discuss something with you," he said. his voice carrying a new urgency. My wife has been here for 6 weeks. The bills are mounting, and there's no significant improvement. I think it's time to consider other options. Mr. Hartwell, I understand the financial strain, but Rachel's condition is actually showing signs of improvement. The brain scans from this morning. She's been like this for over a month, David interrupted. No movement, no response, nothing. How is that improvement? Healing takes time. Brain injuries aren't like broken bones. The recovery process can be slow and unpredictable, but what if she never recovers? What if this is as good as it gets? Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Are you asking me to recommend withdrawing life support? I'm asking you to be realistic about her chances. Her chances are better today than they were yesterday, and tomorrow they may be better still. That evening, David didn't visit alone. Melissa was with him, along with a man I didn't recognize. Their conversation made it clear he was another doctor, someone more sympathetic to David's financial concerns. Dr. Brennan has reviewed Rachel's case, David announced, as if this stranger's opinion carried more weight than the medical team that had been treating me for weeks. The prognosis is not encouraging, Dr. Brennan said in a voice devoid of warmth or hope. Prolonged unconsciousness following this type of injury often indicates irreversible damage. Liar. I wanted to scream the word, to expose his false assessment for what it was. So you're recommending withdrawal of life support? Melissa asked, playing her role perfectly. I'm recommending that the family consider all options, including allowing natural death to occur without artificial intervention. Natural death. As if starving me to death or suffocating me was somehow natural. How would that work exactly? David asked. We would remove the feeding tube and ventilator. Make her comfortable with pain medication. It's usually very peaceful. Peaceful for whom? Certainly not for the conscious person trapped inside an unresponsive body, aware of every moment of her murder. That night, David made his decision. He returned to the hospital with legal documents, papers that would authorize the medical staff to begin the process of ending my life. But as he sat beside my bed, reading through the forms with clinical detachment, something miraculous happened. My left hand moved. It was slight, barely perceptible, but it was movement. Voluntary, purposeful movement, David didn't notice. He was too focused on the documents that would make him a widower and a wealthy man, but the night nurse noticed. Maria Santos had been caring for me since the beginning, speaking to me in Spanish and English, treating me like a person rather than a problem. She saw my hand twitch and immediately called for Dr. Martinez. Look at this, she whispered, gently lifting my hand. Rachel, can you squeeze my fingers? I concentrated every ounce of energy on that simple task. Squeeze, move, respond. My fingers closed weakly around hers. Oh my God, Maria breathed. Dr. Martinez needs to see this immediately. David looked up from his paperwork, confused by the sudden commotion. What's happening? He asked, rising from his chair. She squeezed my hand, Maria said, her voice filled with excitement. She's responsive. I tried to squeeze again to show them that I was here, that I was fighting. This time David saw it too. His face went pale, then hardened with something that looked like disappointment. Are you sure that wasn't just a reflex? He asked. It was purposeful, Maria insisted. Rachel, squeeze once for yes, twice for no. Can you hear me? I squeezed once, putting every ounce of determination into that simple gesture. Dr. Martinez arrived within minutes, still in his surgical scrubs from an emergency procedure. He conducted a series of tests, each one confirming what Maria had discovered. This is remarkable, he said, unable to hide his excitement. Rachel, you're making excellent progress. Can you try to open your eyes? Opening my eyes felt like lifting weights with my eyelids, but I managed it. The world came into focus slowly, and the first face I saw was David's. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, he had. Hello, Rachel, Dr. Martinez said gently. You've been unconscious for 6 weeks. You were in a serious accident, but you're going to be okay. I tried to speak, but the ventilator tube prevented any sound. Dr. Martinez understood immediately. We'll remove the breathing tube soon. For now, just rest. You've made tremendous progress tonight. As the medical team bustled around my bed, running tests and making adjustments, I watched David carefully. He stood in the corner, the legal documents still clutched in his hand, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Relief wasn't one of them. Over the next several hours, as news of my awakening spread through the hospital, visitors began arriving. Emma burst into tears when she saw my open eyes. David's mother praised God for answering her prayers. Kevin seemed genuinely happy for what he assumed was his business partner's good fortune. But I wasn't fooled by the performance. I had heard everything, remembered every word, understood every plan they had made for my death. David thought he was married to a brain-damaged woman who would never remember the conversations that had taken place while she was unconscious, had no idea that his wife had been listening, learning, and planning her own form of justice. Dr. Martinez removed the ventilator tube the following morning, a procedure that felt like being reborn. My voice, when it finally worked, was hoarse and weak. But it was mine. "David," I whispered, looking directly at my husband. "We need to talk." He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. But you need to rest first. The doctor says you have a long recovery ahead." "I remember everything," I said quietly, watching his face carefully. "Remember what, honey?" "The accident was pretty traumatic. The doctor said you might have some memory gaps. I remember listening," I continued, each word deliberate and clear. "Hearing every conversation, every plan, every lie." The color drained from David's face, but he maintained his composure. "Rachel, you're confused. You've been unconscious for weeks. You couldn't have heard anything." "Melissa," I said simply. He froze. "The insurance money. The life insurance policy? Dr. Brennan and his recommendation for natural death." David glanced around the room, ensuring we were alone, then leaned closer to my bed. "Rachel, you're not thinking clearly. The medication, the trauma." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I interrupted. "I know what you plan to do. I know why you wanted me dead." "You're my wife," he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "I love you. I would never— You would. You were going to. And now you're going to pay for it." The man who had plotted my murder now faced the woman who had heard every word of his conspiracy. His carefully laid plans had crumbled the moment my fingers squeezed Maria's hand. But David had always been good at adapting to unexpected situations. Within seconds, his expression shifted from panic to concern, from guilt to innocence. "Sweetheart, I think the accident has affected your memory more than we realized. Maybe we should call Dr. Martinez." "Call him," I agreed. "And while you're at it, call the police. I have quite a story to tell them." David's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator I had married without knowing it. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine, and you've been in a coma for 6 weeks. Who's going to believe you?" "We'll see," I whispered, closing my eyes and pretending to drift back to sleep. But sleep was the last thing on my mind. I had work to do, justice to plan, and a husband to destroy. After all, he had taught me that some problems required permanent solutions. As David left that evening, believing he had convinced me that my memories were delusions, I began to plan my revenge. He thought he was dealing with a confused accident victim, easy to manipulate and control. He had no idea he was facing a woman who had heard every word of his betrayal and had 6 weeks to plan her response. The game was just beginning, and this time, I held all the cards. Recovery, I discovered, was the perfect cover for investigation. While David believed he was managing a confused wife whose memories were unreliable, I was systematically gathering evidence of his attempted murder conspiracy. Dr. Martinez had prescribed physical therapy 3 times a week, which gave me access to the hospital's rehabilitation wing where Melissa worked. During my sessions, I observed her carefully, noting her schedule, her interactions with other staff, and most importantly, her continued relationship with my husband. "You're making remarkable progress," my physical therapist, Carmen, said as I managed to walk the length of the parallel bars unassisted. Most patients with your type of injury take months to reach this level of mobility. I'm motivated, I replied, watching Melissa through the glass partition as she worked with another patient. I have things I need to do. Carmen followed my gaze. Oh, that's Melissa. She's been asking about you. Says she knows your husband from somewhere. I'm sure she does, I murmured, filing away this confirmation of their connection. David visited every day, playing the role of devoted husband with Academy Award precision. He brought flowers, read to me from magazines, and spoke earnestly with my doctors about my progress. To anyone watching, he appeared to be the perfect spouse, supportive and caring through his wife's difficult recovery. But I saw the calculation behind his concern. The way his eyes assessed my cognitive function during every conversation, searching for signs that my memories of his betrayal were real or imagined. The neurologist wants to run more tests, he told me one afternoon, his tone carefully neutral, to check for any lingering effects from the accident. What kind of effects? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Memory issues, confusion, personality changes. Head trauma can cause all sorts of problems. He was laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent, I realized. If he couldn't convince me that my memories were false, he would convince everyone else that my mind was damaged beyond repair. Two could play that game. I began researching David's business from my hospital bed, using the tablet Emma had brought me. Hartwell and Associates Architecture had been struggling financially long before my accident, I discovered. Several major projects had fallen through, and the firm was carrying significant debt. My life insurance policy, recently increased to $750,000 at David's suggestion, would have solved all his financial problems while clearing the way for his relationship with Melissa. But I was alive, and that created complications he hadn't planned for. The first sign of his desperation came during a visit from our insurance adjuster, Richard Kowalski. David had arranged the meeting to discuss the accident settlement, but I had my own agenda, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm glad to see you're recovering so well, Kowalski said, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair. We're prepared to offer a settlement of $285,000 for the accident. The other driver's insurance company is eager to resolve this quickly. That seems low, I said, surprising both men. I was unconscious for 6 weeks. The medical bills alone. The bills are covered by your health insurance, David interrupted quickly. We should take the settlement and move on. Actually, I continued, ignoring my husband's sharp look, I'd like to review all the financial implications before making any decisions. The accident has given me a new perspective on the importance of thorough planning. Kowalski nodded approvingly. Very wise. Head injuries can have lasting effects that don't become apparent until months later. We want to ensure adequate compensation for any ongoing issues. David's jaw tightened. A larger settlement meant more money under my control, money he couldn't access if I remained competent to manage my own affairs. After Kowalski left, David's mask slipped slightly. Rachel, you're not thinking clearly. The settlement offer is fair, and we need the money now. The business has expenses. What expenses? I asked innocently. I thought the firm was doing well. It is, but medical costs, lost time from work while I've been here with you? You've been spending a lot of time here, I agreed. With Melissa, his face went pale. What are you talking about? The physical therapist, Melissa Crawford, 28 years old, divorced, no children. She mentioned knowing you. We might have met in passing. It's a small hospital. I'm sure it is. That evening, David didn't visit. Instead, I received an unexpected guest, Detective Sarah Chen from the local police department. Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I'm investigating some irregularities related to your accident. My heart rate monitor betrayed my sudden interest, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of irregularities? The drunk driver who hit you, Marcus Webb. He claims he was drugged the night of the accident. Says he doesn't remember drinking anything stronger than beer, but his blood alcohol was nearly twice the legal limit. I processed this information carefully. You think someone spiked his drinks? It's possible. We're running additional toxicology tests. In the meantime, I wanted to ask if you or your husband had any enemies, anyone who might benefit from your incapacitation. The word hung in the air like a loaded gun. Someone had tried to kill me, and it might not have been an accident after all. I can't think of anyone, I lied smoothly. But I'd like to help with your investigation in any way I can. Detective Chen left her card and a promise to keep me updated. As soon as she was gone, I called Emma. Emma, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to keep it completely confidential. Of course, Rachel. What do you need? I need you to hire a private investigator. Someone discreet. Someone who can look into David's activities over the past few months. Rachel, what are you saying? David loves you. He's been devastated by your accident. Just trust me. And Emma, don't tell anyone we had this conversation. The private investigator Emma hired was a former police detective named Frank Morrison. Within a week, he had compiled a dossier that confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed details I hadn't imagined. David's affair with Melissa had begun 4 months before my accident. She had moved into his downtown apartment 3 weeks after I was hospitalized. They had opened a joint bank account and were already looking at houses together, but the most damning evidence was financial. David had increased my life insurance policy twice in the 6 months before the accident, not once as I remembered. He had also taken out a substantial business loan using our house as collateral, money that had been used not for business expenses, but to pay off his gambling debts. My husband wasn't just an adulterer and would-be murderer. He was also a compulsive gambler who had risked everything we owned on his addiction. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unlikely source, Marcus Webb's girlfriend, Crystal, who contacted Detective Chen with new information. Marcus was acting weird that night, she told me during a 3-way phone call Chen had arranged. He kept checking his phone and he got this text message that made him really angry. Do you remember what the message said? Chen asked. Something about his sister's medical bills. Marcus has been paying for her cancer treatments, and someone threatened to cut off her funding if he didn't do something. Marcus Webb's sister was being treated at the same hospital where I had been a patient, the same hospital where Melissa worked, with access to patient records and family information. The conspiracy was bigger than I had imagined, and David was at the center of it all, but proving it would require more than circumstantial evidence. I needed a confession, and I knew exactly how to get one. The plan began with Dr. Martinez, who had become an unwitting ally in my quest for justice. During my next appointment, I asked him about the night I woke up. Doctor, I've been having some disturbing memories about that evening, conversations I thought I heard while I was unconscious. That's not uncommon, he assured me. Patients in your condition often retain auditory memories. The brain continues processing sound even when other functions are impaired. So if I heard people talking about withdrawing my life support, that could be real? His expression grew serious. You heard those conversations? I heard my husband discussing it with another doctor, someone named Dr. Brennan. Dr. Martinez frowned. There's no Dr. Brennan on our staff, and any discussion about end-of-life care would involve me and the patient's family together, not separate consultations. Then who was this other doctor? I don't know, but I intend to find out. Within hours, security footage from the hospital revealed the truth. The man David had brought to my bedside wasn't a doctor at all. He was Thomas Brennan, a disbarred lawyer who had been posing as a medical professional to help David build a case for withdrawing my life support. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more than fraud and conspiracy. I needed proof of attempted murder. The opportunity came when David finally lost his patience with my recovery. Rachel, we need to talk about your memories, he said during one of his visits, his voice carrying a new edge. These fantasies about overhearing conversations, about Melissa and insurance money, they're symptoms of your brain injury. They don't feel like fantasies, I replied carefully. Dr. Patterson thinks you should be evaluated by a psychiatrist to help you distinguish between real memories and trauma-induced delusions. Dr. Patterson was another name I didn't recognize from my medical team. I'd like to meet this Dr. Patterson, I said. When can we arrange that? Actually, he's available now. I asked him to stop by. The man who entered my room looked nothing like the medical professionals who had been treating me. He was younger, nervous, and his credentials looked freshly printed. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Dr. Patterson. Your husband has expressed concern about some confusion you've been experiencing. Have you reviewed my medical records? I asked. Of course. Your case is quite complex. Then you know about my improved brain function, my motor control recovery, and my cognitive assessment scores? He hesitated. Well, there can be variations. Dr. Patterson, what's your medical license number? The question hung in the air like a trap springing shut. This man, like the fake Dr. Brennan, had no medical credentials. David was bringing in actors to declare me mentally incompetent, creating false medical records to support his claim that my memories were delusions. But he had made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated his wife's intelligence and determination. I think I need to call hospital security, I said calmly, pressing my call button. There's an imposter in my room. David's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, a cold calculation I had never seen before. Rachel, you're making a mistake. Dr. Patterson is here to help you. Help me die, you mean? Just like Dr. Brennan was going to help me die. The fake doctor was already backing toward the door, but David stood his ground. You can't prove anything, he said quietly. It's your word against mine, and everyone knows head trauma causes paranoid delusions. Everyone except Detective Chen, I replied. And Frank Morrison, my private investigator. And the security cameras that recorded every one of your visits with your fake medical consultants. For the first time since I'd awakened, David looked genuinely frightened. You hired a private investigator? I hired a lot of people. Lawyers, accountants, forensic auditors. Did you know that Marcus Webb's sister received an anonymous payment for her medical bills the day before my accident? A payment traced to an account jointly held by you and Melissa. David slumped into the chair beside my bed, the weight of his exposed conspiracy finally breaking his composure. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said quietly. You were supposed to die in the accident. Clean, simple, no questions asked. But I didn't die, so you decided to finish the job in the hospital. We needed the money, Rachel. The business, my debts, everything was falling apart. So you arranged to have me killed, and then planned to pull the plug when that didn't work. He nodded slowly. His confession witnessed by the hidden recording device Frank Morrison had planted in my flower arrangement. It would have been merciful, David continued. You would never have known. But I did know. I heard everything. Every conversation, every plan, every moment you betrayed our marriage and my trust. David looked up at me with something that might have been remorse if it weren't mixed with so much self-pity. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices, just like you were going to make me face the consequences of mine. As if summoned by my words, Detective Chen appeared in the doorway with two uniformed officers. David Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and attempted homicide. As they led him away in handcuffs, David turned back to me one last time. I did love you once, he said. No, I replied. You loved what I could provide you. Money, status, security. You never loved me. With David's arrest, the full scope of the conspiracy began to unravel. Melissa was charged as an accessory, the fake doctors were arrested for fraud, and Marcus Webb received immunity in exchange for his testimony about being coerced into causing the accident. But my revenge was just beginning. The wheels of justice, I discovered, moved with surprising speed when presented with overwhelming evidence and a recording of the defendant's confession. Within 2 months of David's arrest, the legal machinery had processed his case with clinical efficiency. He pled guilty to all charges in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, receiving a sentence of 25 years to life. But legal justice was only the beginning of my revenge. Sitting in the courtroom during his sentencing, I watched David's shoulders slump as the judge read his fate aloud. 25 years minimum before possibility of parole? He would be 67 years old if he ever saw freedom again. Melissa received 8 years as an accessory, her physical therapy license revoked permanently. The fake doctors, Thomas Brennan and his accomplice, received 5 years each for fraud and conspiracy. Marcus Webb, in exchange for his testimony, received probation and community service, with the condition that he attend Alcoholics Anonymous and undergo counseling. As David was led away in shackles, he looked back at me one final time. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no sense of closure. Justice served was merely the foundation for what came next. Frank Morrison, the private investigator who had helped build the case against David, brought me a thick folder during my final week of hospitalization. "Everything you asked for," he said, settling into the chair that David had once occupied. "Financial records, business documents, property deeds. Your husband was more thorough in documenting his crimes than most criminals I've encountered." I opened the folder and began reviewing the scope of David's financial destruction. Our joint accounts had been drained to pay his gambling debts. He had mortgaged our house twice, using forged documents to secure loans without my knowledge. The architectural firm that bore his name was bankrupt, its assets liquidated to cover outstanding debts. "How much is left?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "After the lawyers, court costs, and creditors are paid? Maybe $30,000 in recoverable assets. The insurance settlement will help, but you're essentially starting over." Starting over. The phrase should have been daunting, but instead it felt liberating. David had stolen my money, my security, and my trust. But he had also freed me from a marriage built on lies and a life constrained by his manipulation. "There's something else," Frank continued, pulling out a separate file. "David's business partner, Kevin Walsh. He's been trying to distance himself from the firm, claiming he had no knowledge of your husband's activities. I remembered Kevin from the hospital visits, his apparent concern for my recovery, his shock at David's arrest. But I also remembered fragments of conversations I had overheard while in my coma, references to insurance premiums and carrying debt. What did you find?" "Walsh knew about the financial problems long before your accident. He also knew about Melissa. There are text messages between him and David discussing your life insurance policy and how it would solve their business problems." I felt a familiar coldness settle in my chest, the same calculated fury that had sustained me through David's trial. Kevin was part of the conspiracy, not directly involved in planning the murder, but he knew what David was considering and failed to report it. Under the law, that could constitute criminal conspiracy. I closed the file and leaned back in my hospital bed. Kevin Walsh thought he had escaped justice by staying silent during David's trial. He believed his passive complicity would go unnoticed and unpunished. He was wrong. My discharge from the hospital came 3 months after the accident that was supposed to kill me. Dr. Martinez was amazed by my recovery, calling it miraculous. I had regained full motor function. My cognitive abilities were sharper than before the accident, and the brain scans showed complete healing of the initial trauma. "You're remarkable." "Rachel," he said during my final appointment, "I've never seen anyone recover so completely from such severe injuries." "I had motivation," I replied simply. Emma picked me up in her car, driving me to the temporary apartment I had rented while deciding what to do with the house David had mortgaged into oblivion. The insurance settlement had provided enough to cover my immediate needs, but I had bigger plans for the future. "Are you sure you don't want to stay with us?" Emma asked as she helped me carry my few belongings upstairs. "Tom and I have plenty of room." "I need my independence," I said, though the truth was more complex. I needed privacy to execute the next phase of my revenge. The apartment was small but adequate, furnished with the basics while I planned my next moves. The first priority was Kevin Walsh and his architectural firm, which had absorbed David's client list and was profiting from work my husband had started before his arrest. I had Frank Morrison continue his investigation, this time focusing on Kevin's business practices and personal life. What we discovered was a pattern of ethical violations that stretched back years. Kevin had been overbilling clients, cutting corners on safety inspections, and falsifying environmental impact reports to expedite project approvals. But the most damaging evidence was his knowledge of David's gambling addiction and financial crimes. Text messages and emails showed that Kevin had not only known about David's debts, but had actively encouraged him to find creative solutions to their business problems. One message, sent 2 weeks before my accident, was particularly incriminating. The life insurance angle makes sense. Sometimes problems solve themselves. Kevin Walsh hadn't pulled the trigger or drugged Marcus Webb, but he had been a willing collaborator in contemplating my murder for financial gain. Armed with this evidence, I made my first public appearance since the accident. I scheduled a meeting with the State Architectural Licensing Board to file a formal complaint against Kevin Walsh and his business practices. The hearing was held in a sterile conference room downtown, with Kevin and his lawyer sitting across from me and the 5-member board. Kevin looked older than I remembered, stress having carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. "Mrs. Hartwell," the board chairman began, "we understand you have serious allegations against Mr. Walsh regarding his business practices and his knowledge of your husband's criminal activities." I opened my prepared folder and began presenting the evidence Frank had gathered. Financial irregularities, safety violations, fraudulent reports, and most damaging, the communication showing his awareness of David's plan to profit from my death. "This is a witch hunt," Kevin's lawyer protested. "Mrs. Hartwell is clearly traumatized by her husband's betrayal and is lashing out at anyone associated with him." "I'm seeking accountability," I corrected calmly. Mr. Walsh knew that my husband was planning to murder me for insurance money, and his response was to suggest it made business sense. The board members reviewed the evidence in silence, their expressions growing more serious with each document. Kevin's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Mr. Walsh?" The chairman addressed him directly. "Do you deny sending this message about the life insurance angle?" "It was taken out of context," Kevin stammered. "I never thought David would actually." "But you knew he was considering it, and you didn't report it to authorities or try to dissuade him?" Kevin's silence was answer enough. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Kevin Walsh's architectural license was revoked permanently, his firm was placed under investigation, and the case was referred to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. As we left the hearing, Kevin cornered me in the parking lot. "Rachel?" "Please," he said, his composure completely shattered. "I have a family, employees who depend on me. I never wanted you hurt." "But you were willing to profit from my death," I replied, "just like David." "I'll make it right. The business, the money David stole, I'll find a way to pay you back." I studied his desperate face, seeing the same calculating selfishness that had driven David to attempted murder. "Kevin, there is no making this right. There's only facing the consequences of your choices." Within weeks, Kevin's business collapsed under the weight of the investigation. His clients abandoned him, his employees filed wrongful termination suits, and his personal assets were frozen pending criminal charges. He was indicted on conspiracy charges and ultimately received 3 years in prison for his role in the attempted murder plot, but my revenge extended. Beyond the criminal justice system, the insurance settlement from the accident had been larger than initially projected, thanks to the criminal nature of the incident and the additional damages related to the attempted murder conspiracy. Combined with the sale of David's remaining assets and a separate settlement from the hospital where Melissa had worked, I found myself with nearly $1 million in liquid assets. Rather than simply rebuilding my life, I decided to build something entirely new. I used the money to establish the Rachel Hartwell Foundation for Survivor Justice, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence and attempted murder who had been failed by the system. The foundation provided legal assistance, private investigation services, and financial support to people in situations similar to my own. The first case we took involved a woman named Patricia Gonzalez, whose husband had tried to poison her with antifreeze. Like me, Patricia had survived the attempt, but found herself fighting both recovery and a legal system that seemed more interested in expedience than justice. I knew he was planning something. Patricia told me during our first meeting at the Foundation's offices. The way he kept asking about my life insurance, pushing me to increase the coverage. But when I told the police, they said I was paranoid. I hired Frank Morrison to investigate Patricia's case, along with a team of forensic accountants and legal experts. Within 3 months, we had built an airtight case against her husband, documenting the poison purchases, the insurance inquiries, and the financial motive. More importantly, we had given Patricia the resources and support to fight back against someone who had tried to destroy her. The foundation grew rapidly, funded not only by my initial investment, but by donations from people who had read about my case and wanted to support similar victims. We handled dozens of cases in the first year, helping survivors of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and domestic violence get the justice they deserved. But the foundation served another purpose beyond helping others. It was a monument to my survival, a testament to the fact that victims could become advocates and that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied. David learned about the foundation through news coverage while serving his sentence at the state penitentiary. He sent me a letter, the first communication I had received from him since his conviction. "Rachel," the letter began in his familiar handwriting, "I saw the news about your foundation. I'm proud of what you're building, even though I know I have no right to be. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, even when I was planning terrible things. The gambling, the debt, the pressure, none of it excuses what I did, but maybe it explains it. I think about you every day and wonder if you'll ever be able to forgive me." I read the letter once, then fed it into the shredder in my office. Forgiveness was not part of my vocabulary when it came to David. He had shown me who he truly was during the darkest moment of my life, and that revelation could never be undone or excused. 2 years after the accident, I received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Martinez. "Rachel, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to let you know about something. We're publishing a case study about your recovery in the Journal of Neurological Medicine. Your complete healing from such severe brain trauma is unprecedented." "What's the medical explanation?" I asked, curious about the science behind my survival. "Honestly, we're not entirely sure. The brain's ability to heal itself is still largely mysterious, but we think your awareness during the coma may have played a role. The fact that you were processing information, storing memories, and maintaining cognitive function even while unconscious may have protected critical neural pathways. In other words, the very thing that had allowed me to hear David's murder conspiracy had also saved my brain from permanent damage. His betrayal had inadvertently preserved my ability to seek justice. The irony was not lost on me. 5 years after the accident, the foundation had helped over 300 survivors of attempted murder and domestic violence. We had a staff of 25, offices in 3 cities, and a waiting list of cases that grew longer each month. I had never remarried, never even seriously dated. The trauma of David's betrayal had left me cautious about trust, careful about allowing anyone too close to my private thoughts and plans. But I had found purpose in the work, satisfaction in helping others find justice when the system failed them. Emma visited regularly, bringing her children to see their Aunt Rachel and marveling at the life I had built from the ashes of David's destruction. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if the accident hadn't happened?" she asked one afternoon as we watched her kids play in the foundation's garden. I considered the question carefully. Without the accident, I would have remained married to a man who saw me as a financial asset rather than a partner. I would have continued living a life built on lies and manipulation, never knowing the depth of his betrayal until it was too late. "I think about it," I said finally, "but I can't imagine choosing that life over this one. Even knowing what you went through, the pain, the betrayal, the fear, especially because of that. The accident and everything that followed showed me who I really am. Not David's wife or his victim, but a woman capable of surviving anything and helping others do the same." The foundation's latest case involved a man named Robert Chen, whose wife had hired a hitman to kill him for his life insurance money. The assassination attempt had failed, but like so many of our clients, Robert found himself fighting not just physical recovery, but a legal system that seemed skeptical of his claims. "Why would she want me dead?" he asked during our initial consultation, the confusion evident in his voice. We were happy. At least I thought we were. It was a question I heard often from the Foundation's clients, this bewildered inability to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the person who had tried to kill them. I understood the feeling intimately. People are capable of hiding their true nature for years, I told him. Sometimes extreme circumstances reveal who they really are. The important thing now is protecting yourself and making sure justice is served. We took Robert's case, and 6 months later, his wife was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The hitman received 25 to life. Each victory felt personal, a vindication not just for the client, but for everyone who had been betrayed by someone they trusted. On the 10th anniversary of my accident, I returned to the hospital where I had awakened to discover my husband's true nature. Dr. Martinez, now nearing retirement, gave me a tour of the new neurological wing that had been built with a donation from the Foundation, he said as we stood in the ICU where I had spent 6 weeks listening to conversations that would change my life. I've often wondered what you were thinking during those weeks in the coma. What kept you fighting when your body was so badly damaged? I looked at the bed where I had lain helpless while David planned my murder, where I had first understood that survival sometimes required more than just healing. I was planning, I said simply. Planning how to live with what I had learned. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. And did you succeed? I thought about David, serving his sentence in a maximum security prison, his dreams of wealth and freedom destroyed by his own greed and cruelty. I thought about Kevin, whose architectural career had ended in disgrace, and Melissa, whose nursing license would never be restored. But mostly, I thought about the hundreds of survivors who had found justice through the Foundation. People who might otherwise have been forgotten by a system more interested in expedience than truth. Yes, I said, I succeeded. As I left the hospital that day, I felt no lingering connection to the woman who had been brought there a decade ago, broken and unconscious. That Rachel had died in the accident, or perhaps during those 6 weeks of listening to her husband plan her murder. The woman who walked out into the afternoon sun was someone new, forged by betrayal and tempered by justice. She was not bitter or broken, but purposeful and strong, using her survival not just for personal revenge, but for the greater good. David had tried to pull the plug on my life, but instead, he had plugged me into a power I never knew I possessed. The power to not just survive betrayal, but to transform it into something meaningful. In the end, that was the most complete revenge of all. Not just punishment for those who had wronged me, but the creation of something positive from their destructive intentions. They had tried to end my story, but instead, they had given it the most important chapter. As I drove home to prepare for the Foundation's annual gala, where we would celebrate another year of victories and announce our ex